With Season 15 out for over a month now, it's safe to say that the meta didn't really shake up all that much. The same picks that were overpowered before continued to be, and ADC is still completely worthless as a role. But the one thing Season 15 did do is bring a ton more action to the game with way more objectives to fight over. It feels like you're always going from one objective to the next right now, and it's constant action on the Rift, and so I've decided to make this tier list to make things easy for you in terms of your decision making. You can't get every single objective, so it's good to know which ones you should be prioritizing, which ones you can give up, which ones you should contest, etc, so you can always make the best choice. Now I'm just going to outright say these are my personal opinions, and I have two that may be pretty controversial, so keep watching to learn what you should be focusing on, or maybe a different point of view, or if you're a dedicated hate watcher, which I totally respect, then feel free to call me an idiot by the end of the tier list. Now throughout this tier list, I will be letting you know if there's a difference in the priority between objectives in higher elo and the average brackets where most of you play in. That's just what we specialize in at Skillcapped. The courses we make are the best in the scene at taking the information from challengers and making it accessible to the average player. We know what actually happens in low elo, like supports standing 15 yards behind you the whole laning phases, or your jungler invading raptors without you having priority. Well, to be fair, that's actually a fun one because that never stops, even in Challenger. Or, as I'll discuss later in this guide, you guys know how your teammates keep randomly leashing Atakhan and griefing the game. We specialize in the low elo experience and how to actually overcome it by teaching you tactics that actually work for the elo that you're in. And we're so confident we offer a 5-division rank up guarantee while actively using Skillcapped. If we somehow don't deliver on our promise, you get your money back, no questions asked. So if you're interested, sign up using the discount link below. Now we definitely have to start with one of the biggest additions to Season 15, Feats of Strength. Now if you've seen anything on social media, you know that they're kind of overhyped. If you got the kills and objectives to get feats, you were probably already winning the game anyway, so early stats like these were pretty misleading. While you do get some nice free stats on your boots immediately, the upgrades are pretty whatever until 6 items. For example, if you wanted to buy the armor boots, it's usually just better to buy chain vest instead. Overall, it's a mediocre objective. You try to get it, but if you don't, you shouldn't feel too bad. It's going to fall pretty low in the tier list at a C-. Is everything I would love to say if Swifties weren't completely overtuned. You see, Mercs and Steel Caps are pretty overpriced these days, and if you bought Berserker Greaves, well, that probably means you're playing a marksman, which, you know, good luck to you, buddy. And finally, their Sork boots. Look at how they massacred my little boy. They did not deserve all of that. Oh, and Symbiotic, whatever they're called. Meanwhile, Swifties only got a 100 gold nerf, while every other boot got completely gutted. They got nerfed by only 100 gold. So at base, Swifties are already the best boots in the game. You should be buying them most of the time. Then, they also get the best immediate upgrade. They get 5 movement speed while all the other boots get complete trash, and on top of that, they also have the best purchase upgrade. You know how I said you shouldn't upgrade the other boots? Well, Swifties, you definitely can. They give you so much movement speed that spending 750 gold for it is genuinely a viable option. The difference between having Sorks and having upgraded Swifties is 40 movement speed. That is insane. Your champion feels so much different when you have these boots. You have way more options in fights. Now, there is a difference between high and low elo. In high elo, they're broken beyond belief because people actually abuse the movement speed. They're gonna space, tether you, dodge every one of your skill shots. I'm gonna be honest, Lux is probably my favorite character in this game, but I refuse to play her right now just because of Swifties and Feats of Strength. It just isn't fun when people are dodging all of your skill shots effortlessly. Feats of Strength are definitely overrated without Swifties, but simply because they exist, I'm going to put it up to a solid B+ tier until Swifties get nerfed. Surely Riot will nerf them, right? Now, I did say I would mention if there's a difference between high and low elo, but I actually don't think there is for Swifties. In high elo, people abuse the movement speed to outplay each other, but in low elo, there's just a bunch of Garens and Udyrs running around at 10,000 movement speed, and I am very sure that you guys have experienced how frustrating that is. I think they're also a B+ in low elo, and so they're definitely an objective you should be prioritizing. Alright, let's transition to the actual best objective in the game right now, which is Avoid Grubs that sit at a solid S+ tier. And by the way, when I say that they're the best objective in the game, it's all relative. Obviously, you wouldn't want want Void Grubs over Baron, that would be really stupid. But the reason Void Grubs are so strong is because they impact almost the entire game. They spawn super early, and almost every single role has a ton of agency for securing them. Even support should be paying attention to their spawn timer and trying to sync up recalls so they can rotate over there and help their jungler secure it. Sadly, the only role that has no agency for securing Grubs is ADC. I really don't know why you guys are doing this to yourselves. Please role swap. Grubs were already a really important objective, but they did get even better in Season 15, specifically because of feats. Obviously, they help you get the first tower much faster, but they also count towards that objective stack, right? And a ton of junglers can secure them so quickly. Champions like Kayn, Brand, Lilia, Karthus, a ton of AoE champions can just instantly delete all of the Void Grubs very reliably. On the other hand, if your team is the one at risk of losing Feats of Strength, as a jungler you can just swoop in and take one and get out immediately. And because most of the experience is in the first one you kill, that's a really efficient use of your time, and you're denying the feat stack from the camp. Not only are Grubs super efficient for how you take them, but they also give you macro options while taking them away from your opponent as well. So for example, your opponents can't roam while you have Grubs. You can see this Orianna committed to a roam, and so Sylas just stayed mid. Now typically the last 3 plates are the tankiest ones in the tower, but he still one-shots the tower before she's back, and then he just kills her. This is what I mean. When your opponent has Grubs, you can never leave your tower or you will lose it instantly. On the other hand, if you're the one with Grubs, you can roam to other lanes, and if you get a kill, then your teammate is going to get a ton of plates or an entire tower from your good play. So basically, Grubs take away options from your opponents and give you more options, which is just amazing. There's a reason that if you watch some of the pro scrims going on right now, that almost every review is like, guys, we gotta talk about our Grubs rotation.
Mid has good push, top has good push. We just need to open Grubs here. I know you have bot camps, but in my opinion, I think we need to do open Grubs.
Oh, and we cannot forget about the best part about Void Grubs. Let me know if this is happening to you too. Have you ever sat in the fountain thinking, should I wait 10 to 15 gold for this longsword? And then your jungler kills a Grub giving you 10 gold? That is the best feeling in the world. Every time it happens, I just get a massive smile on my face. I love these little guys. Now let's move on to dragons, because I think this is the one that saw the biggest dip in Season 15. I used to think that dragons were S, maybe S plus to focus, but after Season 15, I would put them at a depressing C tier. Unlike how efficient it is to do Void Grubs, every jungle main knows exactly what I'm about to say. It just takes forever to do dragon, especially if your champion doesn't have a lot of single target damage. It's just a really time inefficient objective to take, and while it does give some decent experience, it only gives you 25 gold. I don't know why that's still a thing. That is laughably bad. Obviously, that was all true before this patch. The reason they're much worse now is because there's too much chaos in the game. There's too many objectives to focus on and way too much fighting all the time that a slow-paced objective like Dragon is just not gonna cut it. Dragon stacking was much better when there was less action on the map and you had more time to, slowly and gradually get to Dragon Soul. Now, I will say Soul is still probably the best win condition in the game. You're basically guaranteed to win if you've got it, but I've experienced way more games like these where one team focused on dragons and got up to 3, meanwhile the other team focused on grubs and other stuff, and eventually you just can never really contest for the 4th dragon because you're too behind in every other way. And without the 4th dragon, the first 3 are completely useless, so what was the point? I will say that there is probably a slight difference here between high and low elo. If I had to rank dragons right now in high elo, I'd probably put them at a D, whereas in low elo, I'd probably put them at like a C+. I do think that because games go on longer and throws are more common, that you're probably going to get the 4th dragon more reliably, but even still, you guys know the game is too snowbally, it still probably isn't worth prioritizing dragon, even if you're super low elo. Alright, speaking of dragons, Elder Dragon, that is an S+. Any questions? No? Good. Alright, now we move on to Atakhan, and I'm not looking forward to talking about this one. I'm just gonna rip the band-aid off. I'm putting Atakhan at a B-. In fact, I personally think it might belong in C tier, but I'm trying to be optimistic about this objective. Let me try to explain, because Atakhan hit the rift pretty aggressively, and most people think he's very overpowered. But the more that I thought about it, and the more that I played with Atakhan, the more I realized I just don't think it's very strong, and there's quite a few things dragging him down the tier list. Let's start with the recurring theme that I kept talking about throughout this tier list, which is how easy Atakhan is to actually take. I think Atakhan completely screws over your mental stack whenever you're trying to take him. What I mean by this is that you have to focus on way too many things when you're actually securing him. So because of the damage pattern, Atakhan technically doesn't do much damage if you're just dodging the orbs and avoiding the circle or like the collapsing one, right? But if you're getting hit by these things, you are getting pumped, so you absolutely need to pay attention to his pattern. But the problem is that the Atakhan pit is very small. Not only that, but there's 4 different entrances into the pit, which makes it really easy for your opponents to contest you and attack you from multiple flanks. On top of that, there's tiny corridors all around. Like if you want to escape the pit, you have to go through a tiny corridor. If you want to go into the pit, you have to go through a tiny corridor. So if you combine all of that with his crazy damage pattern, what ends up happening is every Atakhan fight is complete chaos. I have had this happen to me so many times. One team pulls it thinking they're going to force the objective, then they realize, wait a minute, we probably shouldn't be doing this, we're taking so much damage, so they run away. Then the team that pushed them off, they're like, well, we should do it now, right? And now they start taking a ton of damage, and it's just complete chaos every single time. I am so tired of fighting over this objective. Now surely an objective this difficult to take must give you some sort of game-winning buff where you just automatically win. It's impossible to throw your lead, right? Well, that's what a lot of people would have you believe, especially right now while the revive passive is still really annoying, but I would actually argue against that, and I'm going to use my favorite word in every argument ever: context. You are missing context. Stop. Past me. Shut up for a second. I wrote this before the Atakhan revive was changed to 15 seconds, so I want you to think about everything I'm about to say, and then how it is 10 times worse now. Okay, you can keep going. The way you get Atakhan matters. 1, you either omega flip the game over it like we just saw, or you were probably winning so hard in the first place that you got it for free. Let's go under the assumption that you were winning the game so hard that you just got it. So let's start with Voracious, the revive passive. First, let me just say this is probably going to get changed. 1, it came out turbo broken, then it got nerfed to give 200 gold when you die, and as I write this, I checked Froxton's Twitter, and there you go, it's being nerfed again. There is no way this passive stays as is. Now the reason this is going to get changed is obviously because people find it really frustrating. Personally, I don't think the buff is actually that good, it's just frustrating to play against. That may sound odd, but let's think about the context in which you probably got the buff in the first place. If you were winning the game so hard that you got Atakhan for free, now you have a revive passive. You will only get value out of this if you die, which you typically don't really do when you're already winning the game. So now you're forced into a really weird situation where you need to die in a very specific way. Like you need to die in a way where you got enough value to where you're offsetting the fact that your opponent's got 200 gold. Then it needs to give you tempo on the map so you can generate even more gold off of that, which is like weird. That is not an easy thing to do, and all of your teammates have to do that as well, by the way. Like everyone has to die in a really specific way. Some people are just gonna say, well, you just go Force Baron or something. I don't know, like I just don't think that actually works as cleanly as people think it does. I mean, you guys are playing the games too, right? Like typically 1 or 2 of your teammates are complete morons and they just go waste the buff having fun because they're like, ha, I can't die. Now 3 of you have the buff. Well, now you can't really hard force an objective with just 3. You ideally want all 5. So now what do? Well, now you 3 go push and maybe you die. Now you give over like 600 gold. And it's just weird. It's like a buff that takes skill to use well. And even if you know how to use it, your teammates probably don't. It's not like a super straightforward do this and win the game kind of thing. I just think from all the solo queue games I've played, it's pretty overrated. Maybe in competitive it's different, but it definitely isn't that good. Alright, now let's talk about the Ruinous. I would say that this one is an appropriately mediocre buff. And the reason is simple. The relative value of level ups goes down as the game goes on. So for example, at level 1 to level 2 is the biggest power spike in the game. Everyone knows that a level 2 Lucian running at you is insanely strong. But as you're getting into levels 14, 15, 17, and 18, you're not really gaining that much over your opponents. Nice, I got another point in my Lucian W. Yay. Obviously, level ups matter a lot more for some champions like Kassadin and Kayle, but after level 14, your skill ups typically don't matter too much. So getting more more levels is kind of whatever. And that's why I think Ruinous is fine. You get a ton of ability power or AD from the flowers. It's an appropriately B- tier objective for me. Like, yeah, I'm gonna get it if it's free, but it's not like the end of the world if my opponents get it. Now there's obviously also the passive buffs that you get from killing Atakhan. Honestly, these buffs are pretty unnoticeable. I would say that they don't affect Atakhan's tier whatsoever. Alright, let's move on to Baron. This one is an S+ in Challenger, and it's about an A everywhere else. The reason it's so good for Challenger players is because everyone knows their perfect lane assignment, they know how to match wave crashes with each other, they hover the right places, they know when to dive, etc. Grandmasters and below, people just do not use Baron very well. But despite that, Baron is good almost no matter what. Even if you suck at using it, you will almost always get value out of it, right? If you're winning, you're probably going to get way more towers, or maybe even take an inhibitor. Or if you're losing and you manage to steal it somehow, then you're probably going to take a bunch of outer towers and come back in gold. So almost regardless of what happens, it's just really good. Just happens to be much better when everyone knows what they're doing. Alright, let's move on to towers. Now there's going to be quite a few categories here. I'm going to try to simplify it. Let's start with the exception to the following rules. Everything I talk about later does not apply to mid-tier 1. Mid-tier 1 is very unique because it is in the center of the map and it is by far the most important tower in the game, and I would classify it as a B tier in both high and low elo. One, it lets you contest mid priority a little bit safer. It's also very good into obnoxious champions like Kayn, Twitch, and so on. So if you're playing those champions, you want to take mid-tier 1 so you can do cringe assassinations in mid, or if you're playing against those champions, try to make sure your mid tower doesn't fall so you don't get assassinated the whole game. Now let's move on to every other tower, and listen carefully here. Every other tower has no strategic value. They don't open up the map, they don't let you invade the jungle. No, it's just not a thing. I hate whenever those things are said. The only reason you take towers is because of the gold that they give you. So there are completely different rankings between towers that you took on your own or ones that you took grouped up with your team. And this is because gold on one person is way more impactful than gold split amongst a bunch of different people. So let's rank towers based on whether you got them on your own first. Starting with the outer towers, these are just a C tier. They're okay to get, but they don't give that much gold, and they were probably going to go down anyway at some point, so they're kind of whatever. They're fine to get. If you can get them, go for it. Inner towers, on the other hand, are definitely S+. Not only are you getting basically double the gold you would get from taking an outer tower, but you also have to factor in the fact that if you were that strong to take that inner tower, you were probably getting like 2 or 3 waves on the way there, so you've just spiked with a ton of gold immediately. Then after that, I'd say inhibitor towers are a solid A+. They don't give you as much gold as inner towers, but they still open up the inhibitor for you to take later, and they still give you a ton of gold to boot too. And pause for a second. Do you see how much gold I have over this Orianna? I lose this game, by the way. And because I lost, I'm going to rank down inhibitor towers from A+ to A-, because the problem with taking an inhibitor tower too early is that now your teammate gets the really brilliant idea of going to take the inhibitor. Even though we are in season 15, the game has been out for 15 years, how are we still taking inhibitors this early into the game and throwing away our lead? I love it. Anyway, now that we've ranked towers when you get them on your own, let's rank outers, inners, and inhibitors when you take them together with your team. And they can all go into D tier, and this should make your decision making very simple. I'm not saying that you never take towers. You obviously have to take towers to win the game, but you never want to group with your team to take a tower if you have something else you could be doing. I'm going to give you an example. Let's say that you guys won a dragon fight and now you can all 5 go push mid, but let's say there's enemy jungle camps spawning and there's a wave to catch in bottom, a wave in top, and maybe Rift Heralds up too. You guys should split off and catch all the resources on the map rather than grouping to take one tower. It is never worth to put 5 people in one lane to siege a tower, because even if you get it, you're just splitting that gold anyway. It's not really that impactful. Always prioritize gold on yourself as much as possible. And we can finally wrap up this video with my second biggest controversial opinion, Rift Herald. And I am Shelly's biggest hater. This fat, stupid crab is beyond useless. I would say that season 15 knocked Shelly down from D tier all the way to who cares tier. Now the reason for that is simple, is that she used to have a niche. Rift Herald used to spawn at 14 minutes, so you would get it and you would try to play for first tower gold. But first tower gold isn't a thing anymore, and by 16 minutes into the game, the first tower is already gone, so it's not even that useful for securing feats for your team. But that obviously doesn't explain why I thought she was D tier in the first place. So let's talk about why I think she sucks. 1. Rift Herald takes forever to do, just like Dragon. It also comes with an immediate downside where the person holding Rift Herald cannot use their trinket. Not only do you lose your trinket, but you also have to find a good opportunity to actually use Rift Herald and get value out of it. You might think that's actually really easy, but I swear most players have like a really romanticized version of Rift Herald in their head, where they get a ton of towers after wiping the enemy team, and then they drive it across the map into another lane for a massive tempo swing or whatever. In reality, here's what always happens with Herald. You maybe finish off a tower with your team, and you're all splitting the gold by the way, and then someone on your team's like, well, I have to drive it into the next tower, and then they just grief their death for no reason. And that's one of my biggest issues with Rift Herald. Typically, you group up with your team to try to siege one tower, but even if you get the tower, you're all splitting the gold, so like, was it even that worth it? Now, I'm not saying it's completely useless. Getting mid-tier 1 is honestly a pretty good use of Rift Herald. In fact, I think Rift Herald has the potential to be really useful if you just gave it to a really strong split pusher. Imagine a Fiora 1v1ing her lane opponent in side lane all game. If she ever kills them while holding Rift Herald, she would get 2, maybe 3 towers off the Herald alone. That would be game winning. The reason that never happens though is because there's an unfortunate bug in the game where junglers are hard coded to pick up the Herald for who knows what reason. So like the tier list implies, I really don't care about Herald. I'm sure many of you have these amazing memories of getting like 2 or 3 towers with it, then driving it to another lane, and I'm not saying that never happens, but the problem is that only really occurs when you were already winning so hard anyway that you could do that in the first place. Rift Herald wasn't what won you that game. The fact that you killed everyone before summoning Rift Herald is what won you that game. Anyway, that's my objectives tier list for season 15. And remember, if you want the best guides that are actually focused on helping low elo players improve in their specific elo, then check us out at Skillcap with the discount link below. See you next time.